Okay, folks, I am going to start with an anecdote, a reading anecdote. The other day, my wife is watching a TV series in the living room where the bookcases are. I'm bored, I'm sick of my phone, a bit anxious, wondering what I'm going to do next. So I stand up and I go over to the bookcases and I crouch down and I pull from the bottom shelf A Hero of Our Time by Mikhail Lermontov. The book was written in 1841, a year before he died in a duel. Lermontov died in a duel with a fellow army officer when he was only 26 years old. I hadn't read the book in over 20 years. Now, the first time I heard about Lermontov was from a 1992 French film. The English translation is A Heart in Winter, and it's by the French director Claude Sautet, S-A-U-T-E-T. And it's about this violin maker or craftsman named Stephen, played by the French actor Auteuil. And he decides that he is going to play with the heartstrings, let's say, of his partner's new girlfriend, this gorgeous, talented, young violinist, played by Emmanuelle Béart. Okay? Stephen kind of gets her to fall in love with him and then does nothing about it. Now, in one of the early scenes in the book, Stephen is having dinner with his friend who's a bookseller, and the bookseller hands him a book and says, Lermontov, he's like you, dry as a whip. So, I did a little research, and it turned out that Lermontov was one of the early literary bad boys, let's say. When Rebel still wrote poetry, he made his name with a poem titled The Poet's Death, about the death of the great Russian poet Alexander Pushkin, who also died in a duel in 1837. And the last few lines of that poem implicate the throne of the Tsar Nicholas I in the tragic death of Pushkin, and then Lermontov was banished to the boonies of Russia for this. Later he was reinstated in his regiment, and this time he got in a duel with the son of the French ambassador. Nobody was hurt, but still, again, he was banished to the Caucasus. Now, the Caucasus at that time was the frontier of Russia, very similar to the Wild West in the United States. In the regiment, Lermontov twice was singled out for conspicuous bravery, twice was recommended for decorations. The Tsar refused him those decorations, and then when Lermontov did die in the duel, shot in the chest after he declined to shoot, the Tsar supposedly said a dog's death for a dog. So yes, a bad boy, a literary bad boy, unafraid to rankle those in power and with the talent to do it. So I pick up his book with the TV blaring, and I sit down and I blow through the introduction and the first story, Bella, about 40 pages without leaving the room. Normally, I need complete silence to read. Lermontov's voice rose above the dialogue of the series and the action of the series, okay? And it made me think about what the key ingredient, or maybe that the key ingredient, to a book that never bores me no matter how many times I read it, and I've read A Hero of Our Time, I think now 4 times, it made me think that the key ingredient is the vigor of the voice and the clarity of the purpose behind it, no matter, okay, how edifying or morally upright that purpose might be. I can imagine a contemporary critic, steeped in all the buzzwords of the day, saying that A Hero of Our Time glorifies and romanticizes toxic masculinity, that it doesn't sufficiently denounce repugnant male traits, and that all the female characters in it are vain, insipid, weak, or opportunist. Look, you don't want to read this book for the well-rounded female characters. There are none. And the protagonist, Grigory Aleksandrovich Pechorin, is spoiled, capricious, fickle, and cruel. He goes after what he wants, specifically women, very often inexperienced and defenseless women, makes them his playthings, selfishly and without qualms, aware of his rakishness, but disinclined to do anything about it. He is just resigned to his character. Now, call that toxic, call that reprehensible, call that irresponsible. It is what it is. And for that reason, it's refreshing. The book doesn't apologize for itself. The vision and purpose isn't muddled by qualifications, by moralizing consequences, by having the cold-blooded protagonist get his, sobering comeuppance at the end, for example. Look, every day we see people become perverse and twisted and unfeeling. They don't do evil for any serious reasons or with any serious intentions, but just for kicks. Okay, they stir up intrigue and mischief to distract themselves from their boredom and self-disgust, right? They play with and tempt fate. They poke the sleeping dragon, or not even the sleeping dragon, the rat's nest, just to see what they can scare up. That is Pechorin, the protagonist of A Hero of Our Time. Okay, here's the structure of the book. It's a novella in 5 stories. In the first story, Bella, about 40 pages, the Lermontov stand-in is traveling to the Caucasus, and he crosses paths with this junior captain named Maxim Maximitch, who tells the Lermontov stand-in about making the acquaintance of this 25-year-old ensign named Pechorin, who is stationed at his old fort, and how Pechorin, just for the hell of it, decided that he was going to prick the vanity of this impulsive and spoiled son of a local prince, and to then kind of pit that vanity against, let's say, the dastardly machinations of this fierce local bandit and his prize horse. And through this, Pechorin creates a kind of smokescreen behind which he sequesters, then slowly seduces and marries the tomboyish, beautiful, virginal daughter of this same local prince, Bella. Pechorin then ends up getting bored with her, and she suffers the consequences, the tragic consequences of his mischief making. In the second story, about 10 pages long, titled Maxim Maximitch, after the Lermontov stand-in's traveling companion, right, the junior captain, the two of them randomly run into Pechorin at a traveler's inn. And then Pechorin slights Maximitch by not being especially glad to see him and just continuing on his way to Persia. And then Maximitch, in this snit of sour grapes, it's actually quite a touching scene, decides that he wants absolutely nothing to do with Pechorin, and so that he gives to the Lermontov stand-in Pechorin's journals that he left behind at the old fort. And then the Lermontov stand-in publishes these journals after he finds out that Pechorin died on his way back from Persia, although we never really learn how. That's the last 3 stories. The first story, Taman, about 10 pages, I think it's the weakest story in the book. It's about how Pechorin is ripped off by this siren of a smuggler and this urchin who pretends to be blind in this coastal town in the Caucasus. Then, what I think is the best story in the book, it's 60 pages long, it's also the longest. It's called Princess Mary. It's a real humdinger of romantic intrigue that culminates with Pechorin, or a duel that's very, very similar, or eerily similar, to the duel that Lermontov died in. And then the book ends with another 10-page story called The Fatalist, which uses a game of Russian roulette to delve into the idea of predestined death, whether it's possible to taunt death, to force it, or to defy it, or if it's just sort of permanently stamped on some cosmic calendar. I don't think there's a dull moment in the book. There are clumsy moments, though. For example, Pechorin, in the middle of telling his story will suddenly slip into self-analysis. Will just start directly defining and explaining himself to the reader. Who he is, what fuels his passions, what triggers his apathy, the malaise he suffers from, what his inveterate flaws are. Okay, somehow it is not pretentious. But the point is that Lermontov just has Pechorin slip in and out of these flights of self-analysis. There are no transitions. Okay? Or then to drum up intrigue, there will be these moments of almost amateurish melodrama where the main protagonist will eavesdrop from behind a fence or in the shadows or at the corner of a walk or behind a high shrub or, you know, behind some improperly closed shutters, okay, to let the reader in on some plot twist or some developing conspiracy. I mean, it is delicious, but it is not sophisticated storytelling. Or, you know, he uses these kind of tired narrative devices to show a character's internal state. One will go deathly pale, or another will slap his forehead in surprise or frustration, or another will pound the table, or just the way that Bella is told. The story Bella. It's told in these big chunks of dialogue by Maximych, right? While the Lermontov stand-in is saying, and what happened next, and what happened next? But this lack of sophistication doesn't matter because of the pace of the narrative and because of the energy of the prose. More than having literary style, it almost lacks it. Like punk rock, the lack of polish and production only adds to its authenticity. The sensibility behind it, the intrigue, the self-analysis. I am like this, a brooding romantic pessimist. This is who I am, a jaded and cynical rake who lives off the thrill of conquest. There's no real subtlety. It's as though Lermontov is screaming to be heard, regardless of how we might feel about him. This is not a quiet book. It's a loud one because of the direct, no frills, sometimes clunky way that it's told. If you want a book that will grab your attention and hold it, even in a noisy room, then I recommend a hero of our time. And you know what? The film that I mentioned earlier, A Heart in Winter, by Claude Sautet. It turns out that there is a high-resolution version of it on YouTube with subtitles. I will put the link in the description below. The film, by the way, is very subtle, very polished, very stylized. It's almost like, how would the Pechorin sensibility and outlook manifest itself in a modern-day man of refinement and culture? Look, you now have two wonderful evenings ahead of you. One with the film and one with the book. Lucky you, man, lucky you.